So we'll just begin. I mentioned last week I have to end a little bit early because I have to be downtown for somewhere. I apologize. So I'll speak quickly. Any questions from last week?
Yeah, I missed last week. Would you tell me what you did?
Watch the video.
You
watched the video.
That's right, the video.
Yeah. Yeah, it's there. Okay, so I want to do one text we didn't do last week. I put it on the new sheets in case some of you didn't bring the text from last week, though I do applaud those of you who brought the text from last week. So, so if you look at the new text, where it begins, Sheva Brachot. Every time a bell rings in English. Sheva Brachot, wedding blessings. On the white page. You have that?
Yeah.
All right, so what I would like to do today is as follows. We looked at birth issues last week and circumcision and why aren't women circumcised in those issues, as to is circumcision so profoundly covenantal, or is it one of the mitzvot like other mitzvot where some apply to men, some apply to women, and just for biological reasons. The laws related to childbirth only apply to women. And that therefore, while I'm not suggesting by any means it not being important or anything like that, but then it's a way that we saw some approaches as, is it so singular that the question, well, why aren't women, is there something so exclusionary to women that there's not a parallel for it? Or is it just something that we saw some other people say, no, there are different mitzvot in the Torah, and women also have something covenantal, which we saw with the medieval opinion of the before shore and menstrual blood and all of that. So anyway, that's what we did last week, and some other things related to that. So I want to look at today two of the wedding blessings from the wedding, and then we'll look at death. And cheerily end. So, okay. Although we did mention last week, remember, I suggested that death is not necessarily part of the life cycle. Right? We talked about that last week. It's a reality, but then there's part of the life cycle. Okay, so let's look at the Sheva Brachot. Now, at a wedding, just briefly, weddings attempt to answer, Jewish weddings traditionally attempt to answer two questions. One question is, how do you create a relationship between two people who have no blood relationship? Right? So that's question number one. How do you create a marriage? How do you create these sets of obligations and relationships with each other when it does not exist previously? So that's part of the wedding ceremony. That's what the wedding ceremony is attempting to answer there. The second question the wedding ceremony is answering, it doesn't ask us a question, but in answering is, what are the implications that this couple is getting married? What does it mean? Right? Not from a legal, technical point of view of how does one define, create this relationship, which God forbid ends in divorce, requires a divorce, and all of those other things. This question is, what does it mean? What does it mean in the context of the tradition? What does it mean when a couple get married? And the answers to those questions are really found in the Sheva Brachot, the 7 wedding blessings, okay, which are recited at a wedding. And these are pretty common texts. I just want to look at the last 2 of them. Okay, there's normally 7, begins with a cup of wine. There's normally 7. And then we have these last 2 blessings, and after these blessings, they would break the glass, and, and whatever happens after that. Okay, and we talked a little bit about last week the issue of what chuppah is, whether it means canopy or just a definition of when the couple become a couple. But for our purposes now, let's pretend they are, it is taking place under a canopy, because I think it'll contribute to some understanding. Okay, so let me read these 2 blessings. These are the 6th and 7th blessings. And as I read them, just to think about what are these messages saying? What is this saying about the meaning of marriage? What is this saying about the couple? What's going on here? Okay, so the first one is, grant abundant joy, or Hebrew is sameach tisamach, to surely rejoice, to these loving friends, as you, God, bestow gladness upon your created being in the Garden of Eden of old. Blessed are you who gladdens the groom and the bride. Bless you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who created joy and happiness, groom and bride, gladness, jubilation, cheer and delight, love, friendship, harmony, and fellowship. Lord our God, let there speedily be heard in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem the sound of joy and the sound of happiness, the sound of a groom and the sound of a bride, the sound of exultation of grooms from under their chuppah and youths from their joyous banquets. Blessed are you, O Lord, who gladdens the groom and with the bride. All right. So, what's going on with these blessings?
Recalls to me,
Yeah, okay.
recalls
So you
the
didn't
destruction
raise
of
your hand.
Jerusalem.
You didn't raise your hand.
How about they do now, but then now,
Okay.
it recalls to me the destruction of Jerusalem.
Why do you say it recalls the destruction of Jerusalem?
It reminds us when the streets of Jerusalem did not have the sound of joy, and it mentions Jerusalem. And so let there be speedily, to me, that's what it reminds me of.
Okay. Yeah. You had,
Yeah, it's a mitzvah to rejoice with the bride and groom. It's in another prayer too, achnasat chatan v'kala.
good. Yes, there certainly is a mitzvah, though it doesn't formulate it in this language here as a mitzvah upon you, but there certainly is that idea of rejoicing with the bride and groom. Absolutely, in this, you can say this becomes an expression of that. Yeah.
I see a reminder of creation.
Yeah.
In referencing the Garden of Eden.
Good.
And that, therefore, by extrapolating that, marriage is a recreation because the bride and groom are going to do what God provided for in the Garden of Eden. That was one thing.
All right.
Now, the second thing is, gladdens the groom with the bride. That says to me that a man is not complete and joyous until he has a bride.
Anyone want to argue with that?
My husband,
Yeah. All right, good. Yeah.
It's also reminding us of the Messianic era, because it's ushering in the bride and groom like the Messianic era, and we should be happy and joyous. If we're all happy and joyous, it will be the Messianic era.
Yeah, it's sort of the other side of what Phyllis said. Phyllis saw it as lack, you're seeing it as anticipation. Good. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, this is rather mundane, perhaps,
That's okay.
but in light of what you were saying, what is the obligation, or how do you combine the two? This is sort of saying the ultimate desire or the ultimate goal is happiness and where does it say, happiness, friendship, harmony, fellowship.
Yeah, it's a lot of words for saying the same thing. Yeah, good, absolutely. If you want to reinforce it, say it 7 different ways. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Yeah.
To me, it's not a blessing, but it's asking for a blessing.
All right. I mean, it's formulated, right? When I say by blessing, it's a good point. It's using the formulaic blessing, but as part of that formulaic blessing, it is also part of formulaic blessings often include praise, thanksgiving, and even requests. But absolutely, it's important to note that that's part of the formula that comes with it. Good. Yeah.
It puts God in the marriage.
All right, puts God in the marriage. You just want to expand on that?
Well, it's the Godhead was instrumental in making this happen. So you get the notion of being beshert, that somebody picked this out for you. This is a
All right, perhaps. You don't necessarily have to read it like that, but it's nice to have that sense. If you're getting married to someone, that it's your bashert. Right? It's nice to have that sense. Absolutely. Although, okay, it's nice to have that sense, I'll let it go with that. Yeah,
Also, it's Kiddushin, the.
there's no mention
love-
of Kiddushin.
I know, however, but the love of a man and a wife, husband and wife, reflects the love of Israel and God. And maybe that's why they call this whole thing Kiddushin, because.
But it's not called
so-
Kiddushin.
Not
Kiddushin
this
is the first part, which is the betrothal part.
But
This is called
conclude-
Nisuin.
But it's concluding, and it still reflects, it's supposed to reflect that kind of faith.
It might reflect that, yes. Yeah, I'm just saying that this, just so you know, I know I'm being technical here, but this part is called Kiddushin, a Nisui, which is the marriage part of it. But it's fine what you're saying, that certainly that metaphor of marriage and relationship with God is certainly used, both in its sense of relationship together, but it's also used in very powerful terms in relationships, what happens when the relationship falls apart. And that's the more horrifying part of it. But you see both being used that way, absolutely, absolutely. Okay, now I just want to draw on people's comments and put it in a certain framework. What's very interesting about these blessings, and you've all said it, there's nothing to do with the couple. Right? If I were to ask you, well, what blessings would you recite, under the chuppah, if you could make up the blessings, you can imagine, right, what you would want for your, whether it be your own marriage or a kid's marriage or a relative's marriage or a friend's marriage, right? So one thing I think, and it's important to point out these blessings, and none of the 7 blessings are essentially about the couple getting married, are about Susie and Shlomi under the book. Okay? It's not about them. And we saw that also, remember, with, we talked about the circumcision, and also even for for a baby girl also, just as you entered into the covenant, so should you enter into life of Torah, chuppah, right? A good deed. That's not about the particular kid. It's saying this is what should be happening here. So that's number one. These aren't about the particular couple, but it's about something else. It's situating them, as you pointed out, between 2 moments. All right? The moments of creation, right? So gladden them as you gladdened your creation in the Garden of Eden, which, from most Jewish sources, implies that in the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve engaged in regular sexual relationship. Okay, it wasn't something that led to a downfall to be kicked out of the Garden of Eden, but that's, gladden them like you gladdened Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So that's number one. And number two, as you pointed out, there's also a sense of an ultimate redemption here in the second blessing, right? So soon, that let it be heard in the streets of Judah and the cities of Jerusalem, sounds of rejoicing, etc. I mean, the author of this blessing is suggesting that the image of redemption is people celebrating at weddings, right? I mean, that's his image here. What's going to be the joy of rebuilt Jerusalem? It's going to be wedding celebrations. So that the couple here are standing in the sense, they're getting married. When a couple get married, it's a liminal experience, right? Because it's this in-between transformative experience in which they're this in-between state, right? They're in between home, emerging from home, and they're in between actually being a married couple together, right? So if you think back to Genesis chapter 2, therefore a man shall leave his mother and father, cling to his wife, and they'll become one flesh. All right. So the marriage, this process of moving from one to the other. I don't care if they haven't lived at home for 15 years, but it's that sense that the situation moving one for another is this liminal experience. It's this in-between experiences, and in-between experiences carry a certain force with them. All right. So the Jewish people, after leaving Egypt before they get to the land of Israel, right, are in this in-between, this liminal experience of the desert. So in the desert, what happens? They have manna falls from heaven, right? Because it's this in-between experience where there's special forces that play itself out. The first thing that happens when they get to the land of Israel is manna stops falling. All right, because now they're home. Now they are where they are supposed to be. So so life moves to a much more regular pattern. Marriage is this in-between moment that is creating this couple bonded together. But this is the ceremony that does it, that actually creates it and makes it happen. So at this liminal moment, things are different. So suddenly the couple is not just here in 2014, all right, at the golf club, but who are they? They're in the Garden of Eden, as if, that's the poetry of it, and it's as if they're in a redeemed, rebuilt Jerusalem, all right? And so they move from these different poles of creation and redemption, right? So they're sort of in this, just one sec, they're sort of in this liminal time experience, all right? Now it's particularly true when we use an actual chuppah, right? It's as if it becomes protected space, because these are liminal moments are fraught with issues. So this is, we put it under this chuppah as if it's a protected space. Now what do we do to end the wedding ceremony? What does that do?
That's what I was blessed. Redemption.
For every piece of glass, there's a different reason.
For every piece of glass, there's a different reason. But what's it functionally doing? Functionally, what is it doing? You're right, nobody knows the reason. I can give you right. Nobody knows the reason. But what's it doing functionally? It's breaking that moment between creation and redemption. And now you break the glass, you shatter the moment, and now you're back in time as what? Normal time with this new couple, Shlomi and Susan, who are now a married couple, right? But you know, it's that movement. You sort of create this almost transcendent time moment with the blessings, and then you shatter it. That's Mazel Tov, right? Because you shatter it. Why? Because now Shlomi or Susan are married. A minute before they were Adam and Eve and stuff in a redeemed moment. Now that moment is shattered, not because it's a bad thing to shatter it, it's a good thing to shatter it. It's time to enter into normalcy. It's time to enter into normal time. And entering normal time now, breaking that liminal moment, now as a married couple. Yeah?
I learned that the breaking of the glass is because of Jerusalem.
Yeah,
The temple, the
you can
destruction.
think that. It's fine. But I can give you 10 other reasons that are just as good.
Okay.
Why? Because we don't know. I mean, we don't know the reason. It is an old custom for which we don't know, and Jewish sources suggest a variety of reasons. And the principle is, when sources suggest a variety of reasons for something, what does that show? That we don't know, quote unquote, an original reason. It's not that the suggested reasons don't have value. And it's not by any means that the suggested reasons are wrong. I'm not suggesting that at all. They offer something from a certain perspective, which is totally fine. But one shouldn't think that that's the definite reason. People think that's popular, that's the definite reason. But that's not stated, and it's certainly not stated anywhere in the Talmud that I know of. I mean, one of the suggestions, if you look at the Talmud, Tractate Brachot, talks about a couple of rabbis who were at a party, it may very well have been a wedding, and people were drinking too much. So they took an expensive crystal glass and smashed it on the floor and said, calm down, all right? Then the medieval commentary Tosafot on that page of the Talmud says, from here we have the custom of breaking a glass at a wedding. All right, so what is that? It has nothing to do with it, right? Now, it's not to say there aren't those who suggest the Jerusalem piece that fits in totally fine. What I'm just trying to suggest is that even with those reasons, there's also something functionally taking place that is even if let's say it's remember Instructor Jerusalem breaking the glass, but it's still doing something. It's breaking that moment of transcendence that the blessings are suggesting and saying Mazel Tov. You're now showing me in Susan. you're past that liminal moment. You're now a married couple, so, sort of get on with your life. And it's that sense of the return to normalcy. Okay? Yeah.
I can see that there's another aspect of it too. We mentioned before about the Exodus, that when manna fell from heaven until they reached Israel, you could say that a parallel here is that they were living with their parents, and manna stops falling.
Yeah.
And now they're married.
Yeah, good. No, good, but that's part of that shift, exactly. But that's part of the shift, right? That's part of the shift that has taken place. That's part of the shift that emerges. Even though sometimes, kids would support a family, but that's part of the shift that emerges. They're no longer the authority of parents, but they've created this new thing. No, good, good, good. Now, however, if you have the opportunity to sponsor a wedding, you can always say, well, I'll leave it up to God to supply the food. That's him saying if it's before the ceremony, there'll be manna from heaven. After the ceremony, no, it's down to okay, good. Any other questions or comments on that? I just want, yeah.
How come there's never anything about good health and long life and...
Because you're right about that. Yeah, people say those blessings, people say to people, you should have a long life together, a good life together, and all of that. People say that stuff, but that's not part of the ceremony.
I know.
Because that's not it's not part of the ceremony because it's not what is being evoked at the ceremony. Again, this is the transcendent, the blessings are evoking a transcendent moment. And really saying, what does it mean to be this couple? It means to stand at two poles, right? Creation and redemption. And that's what it evokes. Once they become normal, afterwards you can give a toast and say you should have a gesunte life, et cetera, et cetera. But what these blessings are trying to evoke is something different. That's the other stuff of normal life. Here, the blessings aren't concerned with that because it's sort of answering a different question, right? And then once you get back into the regular stuff, then you're going to have all those pieces. Okay, we'll see how, you're going to see a similar idea now too, how some stuff plays out. All right, that's a little bit about weddings. Now we'll get to a little bit about death. Okay, I want to focus on two issues. One is comforting mourners, and the second issue is how long one mourns. All right, and so I'm not going to deal with issues of burial or funeral, etc., except to say that when it comes to, God forbid, someone dying, there's two aspects that play itself out. One is, and they are related, we'll see, but one is, how is a person who dies to be buried, all right, and everything that's attendant upon that. And the second aspect is, what does it mean to mourn someone? How does one mourn? How does that play out? What are the implications of mourning, and how does mourning on some level also relate to the death of someone who has died? All right, so I'm not going to deal with the funeral pieces or Kaddish now. I really just want to look at this point a little bit. We'll look at it through Maimonides' perspective, which reflects, and partially doesn't reflect, we'll see, earlier rabbinic sources, but the issue of comforting mourners, okay? And how does one comfort mourners, right? We could also have a whole discussion how not to comfort mourners, but we'll leave that. There's lots of stuff about the stupidest things said in houses of mourning, but we won't deal with that now. Although I don't know if I ever told you this story, but I'll tell you a story about the stupidest things said at houses of mourning. Because I have a sneaking suspicion here, many people here have lost someone in their lives and had to deal with it. So, my first wife passed away when she was young. It was she was cancer. She was 36, and so we were sitting Shiva, and lots of people came. And mother-in-law was there, other people, so one of the things that that happens at Shiva houses is food shows up. Sometimes enormous amounts of food. Strictly speaking, in most situations, the food is really for the mourners, but have to serve, but people do. I understand though. In Sephardic tradition, there is in a Shiva house, it's not unusual to have a little schnapps, a piece of cake, and drink a l'chaim in memory of someone who had passed away. Ashkenazi tradition, it's somewhat less so. But, God forbid you're sitting Shiva, it's really good to have one person coordinating food. And if you're going to send food, you should check. All right? Don't just send. So there was one day where within the period, maybe third day Shiva or something, like 2 deli trays showed up. I hadn't asked for them. No one told me they were going to send them. It's massive deli trays. Deb died in May. The following Erev Pesach, 11 months later, I was throwing out deli from the freezer. But anyway, so that's what had happened. So a woman, nice woman, came. I didn't know. Knew my mother would. Walked in the house and somewhat dramatically said, "What can I say?" So I looked up to her and said, "Of course, just tell me you didn't bring deli." Now, as someone who was sitting Shiva in mourning, I could get away with that. I know it wasn't the right thing to do, but you're not supposed to walk in dramatically and say, "What can I say?" Right? Tradition is, you're supposed to, the tradition is, and this only works if both the mourners and those attending know the tradition. Very important. If you know the tradition, but those who are mourning may not be familiar with the tradition, they'll think you're like the rudest person around. So that's very important. But the tradition is to come in and sit down and sell. If the mourner speaks to you, talk, not. And of course it depends on relationship and all of that. And anyway. But okay. So let's go. The Rabbi. Okay, I'll read the first one. How are mourners comforted? Okay? Because there's a mitzvah, the command is to comfort mourners. First, the mitzvah is not about comforting mourners, it's about getting the person buried properly. After that, then comes the mitzvah of comforting mourners. How are mourners comforted? After the deceased is buried, the mourners gather together and stand at the side of the cemetery. All of those who attended the funeral stand around them line after line. A line may be not less than 10, and mourners are not included in the reckoning. Right? You can see this. A lot of people do this at funerals. They ask, please stand on, people at the funeral stand on 2 sides, and the mourners sometimes walk in between. They say, may you be comforted among the mourners who sign in Jerusalem. So this is what my mom is typing in his own way. The mourners stand at the left side of the comforters, and the comforters pass by the mourners one by one and tell them, may you be comforted from heaven. Afterwards, the mourner goes home. On each of the 7 days of mourning, people come to comfort him, her, and them. Whether new people come or not, the others still comfort them. Right? Which is important. It's not just, sometimes at a Shiva, where you do today, it's appropriate to show up once. And that's fine, totally fine. Sometimes it's us suggesting that you may be the type of relationship where you go back numbers of times, right? Because the person, the mourner, is still there to be comforted. All right, we got that? Okay, now, the mourner sits at the head of the company in the house. The mourners are permitted to sit only on the ground, as it says in Job, and they sat with him on the ground, okay? Where we have that tradition of mourners often sitting in lower chairs or stools or something. Some people do is they sit on the couch but they take the pillows off. Is that it's a visible sign that someone is mourning. And obviously you have that back or whatever, obviously use But the notion that the mourners, you know who they are. They are not permitted to say anything until the mourner opens his mouth first, okay, as it is written, also in Eo, right? Job, you want to learn the laws of mourning? Read the book of Job, okay? Because you're not going to learn the laws of weddings from Job. They are not permitted to say anything until the mourner opens his mouth first, as it's written, and no one spoke anything to him. And it states, and then Job held forth, and Eliphaz responded. All right, so yeah, first, if you look at the conversations in the book of Job, Job speaks first, right? And then the other speaks. So you see from that, the mourner should speak first and not the others. Okay. And now, once the mourner shakes his head, so comforters are no longer permitted to sit with him, so that they do not trouble him overly so. Right? Which means if you're going to do a Shiva visit, you got to get an idea of what's going on. Right? Don't stay for dessert. If it's time to go, go. Right? And how you balance that out. And I think you're all familiar with this, with different situations and stuff. All right. But what happens, and this to me, this happens occasionally. I remember reading an obituary in the paper. I'm not sure why I read it. A number of years ago. We read the people. Anyone here open up the paper and read the obits? Right?
As you get older, thing.
As you get older, right. You know that song, the old Weavers song, when they did that reunion concert. How do I know my youth is all spent? My get up and go has gone up and went. Right. So the last verse is, I wake up each morning and roll out of bed. How does it go? I'll pick up the newspaper, and if I'm not there, I know I'm not dead. So I eat a good breakfast and roll back to bed. Right? All right. So but I remember it's reading a bit. It was about a Catholic priest who died. Very nice. And the last line is, there are no survivors. And you just, there's something. I mean, it happens. We understand that. It's not a judgment, God forbid. But there's a certain sadness, right? There's no survivors, right? So what happens if someone dies and there are no survivors? All right, so the community buries the person, and that's what they do. But this, when in Laws of Mourning, in chapter 3, my monitor is talking about comforting the mourners. But here there's no mourners, right? There's no one. So he says as follows. When a deceased person has no near of kin who must be comforted, meaning no children, no brothers and sisters, no parents. When a deceased person has no near of kin who must be comforted, 10 upright men from the community at large come and sit in his place throughout the 7 days of mourning. Okay, people don't do this that much anymore. But I know it definitely has been done. Because a friend of mine was telling me a story he heard from when the great Bible scholar Yecheskel Kaufman died. Kaufman was alone. The other scholars came, and they really came every day to sit Shiva for him, right? And sit in his place throughout the 7 days of mourning. Others gather around them. If there are not 10 fixed people who remain throughout the 7 days, each day 10 other people are selected and they sit in his place. Okay? His place means the place of the person who, a mourner. Okay. So what's going on here? Why do you think this is what it is? Or if there's any questions or comments yet? I saw a couple of hands. Yeah.
I don't have a question, it's just a comment.
No, please.
I have a son living in Cambodia, and he's become somewhat attached to the Lubavitcher Rabbi.
Yeah.
So I get all the notices. And just 2 weeks ago, he placed a notice that they needed 10 men, actually in Thailand, to bury a person who had no family, no connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, it happens.
And I was very touched by it. I had not heard of that. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
And I think it's really probably a very meaningful tradition.
Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah.
I know that you
Speak up.
I remember hearing that the reason for the Shiva, you have to have, so that the person who's staying at home can't get to the temple to pray, so it comes to them, so that you do your prayers daily, but now you're comforted by your community.
Right.
If there's no one there to pray, so it has to be something about the soul that is departed. It's still honoring that person, because now it's not a place of comforting and bringing somebody to the ability to pray. It's now something, the soul maybe still be staying around a little.
All right, it's interesting. All right, hold that thought. Good. Hold that thought. Yeah.
I was going to suggest something similar to what Sharon said. If the soul is past, and it's between its earthly realm and the spiritual realm, yes?
Well, the person's been buried, but okay.
Or the person's been buried.
Yeah.
Well,
But continue the thought.
The same thing I think would kind of apply. Let me kind of revise it now, though.
No, that's fine. Continue the thought.
Because I know messed up my story.
Well, say it anyway.
It would somehow, so you're going from, so you're buried, okay, let's say you're buried, newly buried, and there's something about the transversing of a human being, of a soul, that is no more of a body, but of a spiritual nature. And I know that there's this period of time after the passing of someone, even if they have been buried, where they're still considered in kind of a transitioning.
All right, good.
And maybe these 10 righteous people are the implements, are the baggage, are the proprietors that help assist this person while that person's relatives who have passed on before are waiting to receive this person.
Okay.
So, okay, it's about giving and receiving.
Good, good.
It's about people who are here to help you pass, even if you're in a buried state, and those who are already have passed in a spiritual space, waiting to receive you.
Good, good. No, thank you. We'll see how that plays out. Good. Yeah.
When you need 10 men for opinion,
Yeah.
and you need 10 to say the prayers this is the minion for saying the prayers for the dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's just respect that all of Israel mourns when someone dies, not just a blood relative, but it is a loss for everyone.
Okay.
So that's symbolic
good.
there as a community, they're mourning the loss of someone.
Good. Anyone else? Yeah.
Just a quick question. When the deceased has no near kin and 10 people are selected, who makes the selection?
It would be it's sort of, people would come out. Again, if you're thinking about a small community or et cetera, people would come out. I'll throw it out to you guys. You have a congregation here. If a member of the congregation dies with no surviving kin, then maybe someone in the shul would say, you know what, we should do something. So let's call up 10 people. So you have a visiting the sick committee, you have people who choose, to do this. In a smaller community, you sort of know, but you're pointing out something logistically. You have to get 10 people who can take off the work and go. I agree with you. I mean, so that's sort of something internal the community would do. Something internal the community would do. Now you notice, so the 10 people from the community are doing what?
Sitting and keeping company.
Well, there's no one to keep.
The mourner.
Well, there is no mourner. Remember, this is a case where there's no one left to mourn. So the 10 people are doing what? In terms of what Maimonides says. They're like the mourners, right? And then other people come and gather around them to sort of comfort those
Treat them
as if they were mourners. Okay, good. Good. Okay, that's how I want you to see the structure. Okay. Now I want you to look below where it says Shabbat 152ab. This is from, the Talmud Tractate Shabbat, and which is, again, Maimonides says the early Middle Ages. This is you'll see. The question is this what we're going to read, the source for Maimonides? I'll read this source. So this goes back, the year 400 or 500. Rav Chisda said, a man's soul mourns for him after death 7 whole days. Right? This is what you were saying. okay? A man's soul mourns for him after death 7 whole days, for it is said, and his soul mourns for him. And it is written, and he made a mourning for his father 7 days. Okay, so here it's taking it that it's not so much for the soul is mourning the loss of the person who, who bore that soul, okay? And it says it lasts for 7 days. So there is that, sort of that sense of what you were talking about. Rabbi Judah said, a dead person for whom there are no comforters, 10 people go and sit in his place. A certain man died in the neighborhood of Rabbi Judah. As there were none to be comforted, Rabbi Judah assembled 10 men every day, and they sat in his place. After 7 days, he, the dead man, appeared to him in a dream and said to him, "Your mind be at rest, Rabbi Judah, for you have set my mind at rest." Rabbi Vahu said, "The dead man knows all that is said in the presence until the top stone Golel closes the grave." That's separate. Rabbi Vahu was saying it really ends with the grave, but here it's saying, it seems to be saying, for 7 days. Yeah?
And also, it might then apply to the fact that if there was no one to sit, and the soul was still mourning the body that it encompassed, then that soul who had no mourners to accompany it would not be able to go on to embody another
Okay.
being, if you believe in the notion of reincarnation.
Yeah, which it's not clear the Talmud does, but okay. But it seems to need that. It seems to need that. Okay, so is this the source for Maimonides? You understand? Okay, yeah.
My question is, as it is written, which one sees commonly in translations from the Talmud, where is it written? That it's as it is?
Yeah, I didn't bring the verse. I think
Okay,
it was
okay.
just, I think it was mourning for Jacob, but I don't remember. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Okay. Is this, do you understand my question? We saw what Maimonides says. Here you have the Talmud, 6 and 700 years earlier Maimonides. Is this the source for Maimonides or not?
Doesn't it go back to the original Torah that God gave Moses?
No, I mean, this is, Maimonides uses the Talmud all the time.
Oh.
Yeah, absolutely. But my question is this the source for Maimonides? Tell me yes or tell me no, and why? Yeah.
Perhaps yes, but
Why?
Maimonides.
Well, say why
right.
yes first. Even if you
Because
disagree
of
with
the
it.
sitting for 7 days.
Good.
For those pieces. However,
Yeah.
Maimonides is writing in a different milieu.
Now, don't give me history.
Yeah, but it matters.
No, it doesn't matter.
Because
Why?
Because Maimonides is living in a community, perhaps, that needs to be assembled. Judah is living in a community, a Jewish community.
Maimonides is living with Jews.
Perhaps he's living in a community where you need to gather the people. You have a commitment. You need to come together for this.
No, I disagree with you. I wouldn't go that way. I know. Good try, but good try. But I don't think it applies here. They both lived in Jewish communities. Both lived in a Jewish community. And these were small communities in Babylonia. It's not that they were so big. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It says a dead person for whom there are no comforters.
Yeah.
Which is.
Which is what?
not- we were talking about people mourning, someone who has no mourners.
Yeah, you see the difference? I want you to pick up on that. Because there is a difference here. You'll notice that this Talmudic source, the worry here is the soul of the person who died. All right? And so there's a dead person for whom there were no comforters. 10 people go and sit in his place. In this case, it seems to be his place is the place of, like, the dead person, right? And then what do you have? As there are none to be comforted, Rabbi Yehuda would gather 10 men every day, and they sat in his place. Now, Maimonides says you gather 10 men, right? But what else happens for Maimonides? People come to comfort those, right? And others gather around them. People come to comfort those. And then in the Talmud story, the dead man appears and said, "My mind's at rest," right? Which implies that somehow this dead person is still around. For Maimonides, the issue is, when a deceased person has no near of kin who must be comforted, it's not that there aren't comforters, there's no next of kin who must be comforted, then the people come and they substitute for the mourners. All right? They're not worried about the guy who died, per se. But they're substituting for the mourners. And you notice Maimonides doesn't say here there's a soul flying around. Okay? That's not Maimonides. There is that view in the Talmud. I want to be clear, that view exists. But for Maimonides, that is not a view of Maimonides. Maimonides doesn't view things like that. And so his worry is what? That there are no mourners to be comforted. So you must have, you're not worried about the soul being comforted for Maimonides. You're worried about that there's no one mourning the person. So you have to supply, the community must supply the substitute mourners, and then others come to comfort the mourners. Right? I think for Maimonides, there's someone has died. Someone must mourn. It's a little bit related to all of Israel, but someone must mourn the person who died. A loss has taken place. An irreparable loss has taken place. As I said, it relates to what you're saying. Someone must mourn, right? It's not so much the whole community mourns every person who died. You have the relatives, right? But if there are no relatives to mourn, someone must mourn. Because there's something lacking in taking notice that someone has died. And therefore, notice must be taken. Someone must mourn the fact that someone has died. Right? And then Maimonides says, gather 10 who will substitute as the mourners, and other people will comfort them. It's not that you're worried about a dead soul flying around saying no one cares about me. That's not the issue for Maimonides. The issue is anyone who dies, or any, unless they're a real evil person, but we won't get into that now. But anyone who dies must be mourned. And therefore, if there are no mourners, you must find mourners. And then when you have mourners, you need people to comfort those mourners. Because there's something lacking if the loss is not acknowledged. All right? And that's very different than what the Talmud's saying. The Talmud's worried about a different question there. You see that? I mean, it's parallel, but Maimonides steers away from that, because Maimonides doesn't believe in souls flying around. Okay, 1, 2, 3.
The more I'm listening, the more it sounds as though you're talking also about the wholeness of a community. And that this is so important. Birth is important, and weddings are important, and it's a rite of passage, and it belongs to the community as a family. And you can't disregard any piece of it. It's all inclusive, and we embrace it all.
Yeah, I don't know if Maimonides would use the term necessarily family. But, I mean, you can derive that and play that out. But I don't think he'd use the term necessarily family. I think what he is bothered by is the fact that when someone, if you don't mark the death of someone, then there's something seriously deficient in the community because someone has died. And that needs to be marked. And that needs to be marked. Otherwise, there's something lacking in the community. You can't, I mean, we'll see how it plays out in the next Maimonides, but you have to recognize that.
And it seems though that by age, when everyone else is gone, it might be a wonderful, righteous human being that needs honoring. That the community is suffering in their own way. because
Yeah, all right, good,
we value age.
Right, because you need to have that, right, the people
Now
who are,
lived.
the people who are coming are the substitute mourners. So they're not just sitting around playing pinochle, right? I mean, so that, good, yeah.
You know, you have just echoed a key line from Death the Salesman.
Yes, I was thinking the same
When
thing.
Willie
He got it
Lomas
from me.
wife says, someone has died, notice must be taken. And
Good,
exactly the
good,
same
good,
words,
good,
the central piece of that.
good, and that plays out with this, mourners must come, good,
I
yeah.
was gonna say the same thing.
Oh, great, yeah.
So I have a bigger question. Over the centuries, these guidelines, so to speak, are written. How do we decide which ones to follow and who to listen to? And what
Good
if I wrote
question.
something and said do it a different way?
Yeah, good question. Well, one is there is some consistency in terms of how it's done. But in this case, between the Talmud and Maimonides, you end up, they're slightly different in terms of practice. Both practices have that sense of 10 people coming. But Maimonides, has his particular take on it for his particular philosophical reasons. That for which he doesn't believe the soul issue, flying or floating around. Again, others do. He doesn't believe it, but he sees the purpose of the 10 for another reason. But the notion you certainly have a consistency of notions of Shiva, from rabbinic literature on. There are lots of different customs. What goes on in a Shiva house, I mentioned that little thing between Sephardim and Ashkenazim. I went to a Shiva for someone who's real North African Sephardic origin. He said, here you have to have a piece of cake, a little schnapp, a bracha. It's a spooks for the person, a merit for the person who died. That's very different than just walking in, sitting down, and being quiet. So they both know of Shiva, but there's some, differences there that are playing itself out. But Shiva's been pretty consistent. Now, I'm fully aware today that some people choose to do less than 7 days and stuff. But that's a pretty, but they still call it Shiva. So, right. It's been a long time. This has been a pretty long time tradition. Although underlying your question is an important, that's been a question of great debate among Jewish movements. That hasn't been figured out yet. Yeah.
The suggestion that comes to my mind is that life is so valuable, it should be dismissed so quickly.
Good. I think that absolutely parallel to that. Absolutely. So how do you do that? Yeah. Good.
I kept thinking throughout this whole thing of John Donne, every man's death diminishes before I am involved in all mankind. And I think that's a Jewish source. He is a Jewish source in that. That's another reason why we mourn as a community, because we are diminished by the loss of one.
Yeah, absolutely. And if they're right, and now yes, the community. I want to be clear. The community takes note of it. The community does not formally mourn, because there are those who formally mourn. Otherwise, we wouldn't do anything, right? But when there aren't those, it's those sentiments. You can't just ignore the fact that someone died. And so therefore, that's what he's saying. You must have those mourners. But certainly what you mentioned, John, not now with the death of himself, although it's a similar sentiment that's absolutely playing itself out. Yeah?
Question, why are these last two under the rules of Shabbat?
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's from the Talmud. The Talmud tractates Shabbat. So that's where this discussion comes up. But even though, although most of the Talmud tractate Shabbat deals with Shabbat laws, okay? No tractate deals with only one thing. There's lots of other stuff that gets interspersed. So it's a good question. There's lots of other stuff that gets interspersed that seems to be off the critical topic. It may be brought in because of literary reasons. You quote someone in someone's name, and then you put together 5 other things the person said, even though they have nothing to do with the original topic. It's sort of related if stuff was more oral tradition, so remember that person. Oh, Rav Chisda, well, there are 5 things Rav Chisda said. All right? So good, right? Even though it seems to be off topic. Right, good. Okay, should we go on? All right, so flip the page. We'll look at another aspect. We're going to do the Talmud first and then Maimonides. Okay, so this is from Moed Katan, which deals with, this tractate happens to be a small holiday, but this tractate deals a lot with mourning customs, okay? And things. Okay, so this also said Rabbi Yehuda as reporting Rav. Okay, again, somebody in previous he said something, now this is what he also said. When a person dies in town, all the townspeople are forbidden from doing work. All right, why might that be? If a person dies in a town, why might all the townspeople be forbidden from doing work?
So they can come and come and comfort him.
Okay, I heard lots of mumbles. Let's hear individually clearly. Yeah.
So they can come and comfort him.
Come and comfort him, one possibility.
They're all related.
Possibly they're all related.
They need people to do all the things that have to be done, the washing of the body, the burial.
Yeah, they need people to worry about the burial. All right? So make sure that, stop working. Man, we're dealing with the metropolises, all right? Make sure people are there to do the burial, to look after the person who died, which again relates somewhat to the community piece, right? The community has a responsibility. It's a responsibility that the person be buried properly, all right? So people have to ensure that happens. So what do? You stop working and you worry about that. Okay, Rav Hamnuna once came to Darumata, one of the towns, Babylonia. He heard the sound of a funerary bugle, something that would, I guess, alert people going on. And he saw, so clearly someone has died, and he saw people carrying on with their work. Right? If someone has died, you're not supposed to work. He goes to this town, and there's someone who has died, and everyone's working. And he said, let the people be under the Shamta, the ban. I mean, this is bad. What, someone has died and you're going to work? How can you? Is there not a dead person in the town? He heard the funerary goes. Is there not a dead person in town? So they told him, in our town there's a chevra, an association in the town. I mean, there's a chevra kadisha. There's a group of people who look after someone who has died. So if there's a group of people who look after someone who has died, everyone else can go to work. And because the needs of the dead person are being looked after. Yeah?
Can a Cohen be a Hever?
No. But the only person a Kohen can involve themselves with if it's one of their direct 7 relatives from whom they have to mourn. Okay? They have to do that. I mean, one of their 7 relatives for whom they have to mourn, then they don't worry about their status of religious purity. Okay, but in generally for someone, generally they would not be part of the chevra who worry about that. However, if someone dies and there's only a Kohen, one person in town to take care of burying that person, then the Kohen must do it. So you get that? All right, so generally not, unless either direct mourning needs or crisis needs, he's the only one in town. Otherwise, generally not. Okay. And furthermore, so Rav Judah told that story. And furthermore, Rabbi Yehuda said, as citing Rav, this is what I really want to focus on. Whoever indulges in grief to excess over the dead will weep for another. There was a certain woman that lived in the neighborhood of Rav Huna. She had 7 sons, one of whom died, and she wept for him rather excessively. Rav Huna sent word to her, act not thus. She heeded him not, she didn't pay attention to Rav Huna, and he sent to her, if you need my word, or heed my word, it is well, but if not, are you anxious to make provision for yet another? And so what happened? The next son died. And then they all died. It's just a story, it doesn't mean it happened. In the end, he said to her, are you fumbling with provision for yourself? And she died. All right, so now what happens in this story? And it's a story, there's a story with a point to the story. What seems to be the issue here that Rav Huna is pointing out? What seems to be the issue here?
Over-grieving
Over-grieving.
is not.
All right, so now why might you think that over-grieving would be a problem?
Because then you're not living. Then you're almost as dead as the dead person.
Okay, so one possibility is you're almost as dead as the dead person. Good. Yeah.
Okay, well, when you said this, all I kept hearing is my mother's voice. I'll give you something to cry about. But I think the reflection is not only what you're doing to yourself, you're having a death in yourself, but she's still living among, she has other sons. And they're not having a mother. So they're experiencing a death and a maternal death. So they're like withering as well. Her attention to them is lessened, and they also have lost so much.
All right, good. Yeah.
If one continues to mourn, does that mean the community has to continue to comfort her?
Well, what would Rav Huna say?
Probably not. There's a
That
limit.
seems Rav Huna saying there's a limit. Rav Huna is saying there's a limit. All right? Yesh gvul, the Rav Huna is saying there's a limit to mourning. Okay. Now, why do you think Rav Huna is saying a limit? Now, that's a phone. All right, Rav Huna is saying, by the way, it's circling the Facebook, there's a great piece. It was an April Fool's Day joke. There was some professor at some college, and they filmed it, who told the students, if you get a phone call, some of you may have seen it, if you get a phone call, you can answer the phone, but you have to put it on speakerphone. So what they did, the professor, someone's phone rang, so he looked at her, she answers on speakerphone, and they said, this is from the whatever, I'll say the Planned Parenthood, so-and-so, the test came back, and you're pregnant. And so the professor is saying, oh, no, you don't have to put it on, and she leaves it on, and the conversation continues for another minute, and then it comes up, and the person on the phone says, and it's a baby, it's going to be a girl, what do you think the name will be? So the woman who gets the call said, the first name is going to be April, and then the last name's going to be Fool's Day. So the professor, it's a great study. You see, he reacted marvelously because he got it, he didn't get upset. But you see him squirming, wait, what's this rule? I paid for this class for something, this private thing. And it's a great piece. Now, why did I say that? I have no idea. All right, so, why do you, so what's wrong? What's wrong with weeping too much? So we've had, a couple of suggestions of that. Yeah.
There's also a small possibility that this could become habitual. And if this woman mourns, then some other person might say, well, look how she mourned. I want to mourn that way too.
Good. Right. It's dangerous for the community.
Then you have a mourning, mourning.
Okay. No, thank you. Yeah.
First of all, it's rather self-indulgent. And another thing is that if we know that this woman has more sons, but if this woman someone is in constant mourning, they are ignoring the people their family, other people around them, and they're not doing well by the living.
All right, good. And one more comment. Does someone else want? Oh, okay. All right. So let's look how the Talmud continues. Our rabbis taught, weep not for the dead, and neither bemoan him. Okay, it's a verse from Jeremiah here. It's talking about one of the Jewish kings who died and his son who was sent away. You have it in Jeremiah 22:10. Weep you not for the dead, nor bemoan him, but weep bitterly for the one who goes away, who was sent away. He shall return to mourn or see his native country. So the rabbis are just playing with the first part of the verse, okay? Weep not for the dead, nor bemoan him. So they're saying, well, if it says weep not for the dead, why does it have to say, and do not bemoan him? One expression would have been enough. And would they also say, what do you mean weep not for the dead? We know you're supposed to mourn for someone. So they said, weep not for the dead. What does that mean? In excess. Okay? Neither bemoan him. What does that mean? They say beyond measure. Not just what we saw, where of course you're supposed to mourn for someone, but here it's talking about in excess. How is that applied? What does it mean? He says 3 days for weeping and 7 for lamenting, which we have shiva, right? So the awareness, first 3 days may be more intense than the other days. And 30 to refrain from cutting the hair and donning pressed clothes. Okay, in other words, for the 30 days. So don't go out and buy a suit on day 8, right? It still continues. Hereafter, the Holy One, blessed be He, says, you are not more compassionate towards the departed than I, God. All right? Now you notice, it gives here a theological reason. Don't think you're more mourning than God is. All right? You see that? Okay, now look at Maimonides. All right? It's actually the continuation, chapter 13. It's actually continuation 11 and 12. Okay, we saw number 10 before. So this is number 11, it says. A person should not become excessively brokenhearted, say weeping more, okay, because of a person's death. As it says in Jeremiah, it quotes the same verse the Talmud quotes. Do not weep for a dead man and do not shake your head, which means bemoan. It's just a different translation of the Hebrew, because of him. That means not to weep excessively, like the Talmud says. Now look what Maimonides says. For death is the pattern of the world, the way the world operates. And a person who causes himself grief because of the pattern of the world is a fool. What should one do? Weep for 3 days, eulogize or lament for 7, observe the restrictions of cutting one's hair and the other 5 matter for 30 days. Now there's a tradition for parents to have even a lower form of mourning for the next, period of months till it's a year. Okay, and no one denies that. It's just that's not the categories he's focusing on here. Okay, now, so how is Maimonides both similar to the Talmud passage we read, and how is Maimonides different? How is Maimonides similar?
Not to excessively mourn.
Not to excessively mourn. How is Maimonides different?
He's suggesting that you gradually prepare to come back to life.
Yeah, okay, I'm not sure the Talmud doesn't do that, but you're absolutely correct on that. I'm not sure the Talmud would disagree with that. I think there's an additional nuance.
Well, he points out that this is normal, and this is God's plan, and you're...
He didn't say God's, who doesn't he quote here? God, he says what? This is...
the way of the world.
This is the way of the world. This is the way of the world. The Talmud here quotes a theological thing and puts it on God, saying, are you more righteous than God? Maimonides is not doing that. For Maimonides, the critical category here is, this is the way of the world. All right? Now, be clear. You have to read Maimonides with the previous one, number 10, which we just read before. There must be mourning, and the loss must be recorded. Okay, even though death is the normal way of the world, but you still have to record the loss. All right, there must be mourning, and if there are no mourners, as we saw, Maimonides says you must have substitute mourners. Right? But it's not about souls flying around. It's not about God saying you're more righteous than that. Maimonides is saying don't excessively mourn, because it's the way of the world, and if you excessively mourn, you're a fool. Because you don't know the way of the world. All right? So there's a certain tension here between both recognizing death as the way of the world, but at the same time recognizing a person has died and they must be mourned. Right? But excessive mourning for Maimonides here is you're like a fool, because you don't realize that's the way the world works. And if you can't see that that's the way it is in the world, and that's the way the world works, then it's not about you acting more righteous than God. You're a fool for not understanding. I know this sounds pretty harsh, but he's making a point. You're a fool. You don't understand that this is the way the world works. Right? This is the way the world works. Yeah?
I find it interesting, the other part here where it talks about somebody who goes away. I assume it means that somebody who's been exiled or excommunicated in some fashion.
Oh, no, forget the second part of the verse. What Jeremiah is referring to in the second part of the verse is King Yoshia, who has died, and his son, who was sent away by the Babylonians and could not rule.
Very interesting.
Yeah. But that specifically has a historical context for Jeremiah. Okay? That specifically has a historical context for Jeremiah. So, I hear what you're saying, but that's not the focus.
I know.
Yeah, good. Okay, so you see the difference? Okay, yeah, well, I'll take one more comment, I gotta stop in 2 minutes.
Okay, so my hope, my perspective listening to this is the reality of it all. Most of us who have losses, the medically competent way of looking at it is that we can't put framework of time on what it does to you emotionally. And you do all of a sudden get pushed back into very deep depression and loss.
Yeah.
So this makes it difficult. It's not as accepting of reality.
Yeah, I think what I would say is as follows here. That's an important point. What I would say is as follows here. The type of mourning that's being expressed here, I think, in the sources, is the type of formal mourning, right? Anyone knows who has lost someone, it's not after 30 days, right? Forget parasomes, it's 30 days, the spouse dies. 30 days, oh, mourning's done, everything's fine. It's not what he was talking about, okay? There's a recognition, of course you're going to experience the loss. There's no question about that. But it's the excessive, for him, public demonstration of that loss in which you're still continually, formally exhibiting mourning, okay? And that's the issue here. It's not that the person's not going to continue that sense of experiencing excessive loss. No question. But if you're experiencing a sense of loss after the formal mourning time, and you're still physically exhibiting those restrictions that come with mourning, okay, you're not willing after 30 days to put on clean clothes, etc. That's what they're pointing out as excessive. Maimonides, no one would deny what is emotionally going on within the individual, okay? So perhaps because it was emotionally going on in the individual, so after 30 days, you know what, put on clean clothes. You got to do that, all right? It doesn't mean that there isn't pain inside of you. It doesn't mean that you can't share that pain inside with you, with others. It doesn't mean others shouldn't pretend that you're still experiencing a form of loss. But you can't look like a grovelly mourner who's just suffered that. Okay, that's what I think Maimonides would agree, the sources would agree with that. That becomes the issue, is that that's the excessive mourning here. It's not the sense of loss, but that's the excessive mourning that Maimonides is saying that, and the Talmud is saying also that you can't exhibit publicly, all right? Because then you're continuing something which the really text is saying you shouldn't be doing. It's not telling you how to respond emotionally. It's telling you how to respond physically, publicly within the context of the community. You got to get up and get out of bed. All right? You can't walk around after 30 days. On the next day, you shouldn't still walk around looking for men. I'll speak as a guy. You can't look around looking disgusting because you haven't shaved. Then someone has a right to come to you. You know what? Go shave. You look disgusting. Well, I'm suffering. I said, I understand that. I'll give you a hug. I know you've suffered a real loss. Okay, I know it's painful. It's going to continue to be painful. I'm not denying that. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't take a shower and shave. And you get that? That's what I think both would absolutely agree on. Okay. You know what? I'm sorry I got to go. I just got to head downtown. You can read number 12 on your own. I mean, it talks about also suffering loss should lead you to be aware of losses you have. It should also look at loss in your own life and lead you maybe to look at your life and do a little repenting. Not repent because the person died because you had sinned, but it's an opportunity to take, stock of your life. Okay, I know we're not ending on a happy note. But anyway, it's always great to be here with you guys, so thank you. Have a good Christmas.